As I mentioned, Feist is here. Hi.
Hi.
So nice to see you, by the way. I don't think I've seen you since
too.
the record came out.
It's been a while.
I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
I
hear you, but I don't often see you.
Well, I hear you too, and I don't often see you. We're just like what Graham Bell imagined the telephone would be. I don't know if that's what that is. What made you want to get into the world of podcasting?
I guess I grew up with, this isn't a CBC name drop, but I grew up with the radio on the kitchen counter. You know, it was always a voice coming off the kitchen counter. And then radio kind of went away, I guess. It was just not like, I guess I wasn't in a kitchen as much or something.
Yeah.
But then podcasts showed up and they were really keeping me company on the road. Like I discovered On Being. You ever listen to that Krista Tippett one?
No.
It's an NPR one. And Radio Lab is phenomenal.
Incredible.
Right?
Yeah.
And I just started to get beguiled again by it. It's so disarming. Listening, just you're alone, you're listening to these ideas, there's new stuff coming at you and your mind is putting it together and your imagination is triggered and yeah.
Incredibly intimate too. Eh?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, I'm never surprised. So sometimes when I go out, people will say, hey to me like I'm their uncle or their brother or
Best
something like
friend,
that.
yeah.
Because I think it is. It's a one-on-one sort of intimate thing, podcasts are.
Well, it leaves a lot to your imagination. It's sort of like reading. You have to come up with your own, if you love a book, you don't necessarily want to watch the movie of it because then your characters will get usurped by the ones on the screen,
Yeah, I felt that way a couple of times.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about this questionnaire you sent out after Pleasure came out?
Yeah, it was having done this a few times, this make a record and then go out and tour it. And there's that step between those two where you go talk about it and with journalists or with anyone who's curious about the record. And that's not the easiest part because often I'm a little close to the record still. I'm not exactly on top of what I was writing about. It's hard to just nutshell it, So I kind of had this idea, this sort of sneaky back way that if I was to write this questionnaire out, which was sort of written on the tenets of the things that I was curious about when I was writing the record, and then give it to the journalists before we did the interview, it would cue their mind up, pun intended.
Hey, get out of here. Come on. She still got it, ladies and gentlemen. She can't turn it off.
Monday morning. Yeah, it would sort of key their mind up to a line of inquiry that was more in keeping with what I wanted to be talking about, which wasn't my subjective story. It was, I'd written about that, and I didn't really have it, it wasn't really something I was like really comfortable talking about yet. So I thought that if I could just sort of play with the idea of deeper thematic kind of tectonic plates underneath the songs and that are in everyone's lives, including the journalists' lives. And anyway, the joke was a couple of the first journalists were really responded well to it, and a couple were like, violated. Like, what is this? I don't want to answer these questions. Like,
you wanted them to answer them.
Yeah, and I also said I wasn't going to read them. It's about exercising that muscle inside yourself to answer questions. Which actually, it's funny. Before I came this morning, I had never answered the questionnaire myself, and I thought I should refamiliarize myself with what it was. And it was really interesting because I think the idea I had at the time was you have a week full of experiences, and half of them are fantastic or bolstering, and half of them are really, somehow disorienting, or they irk you, or you just don't feel comfortable with them. And then at the end of your week, you're mostly you're like ticker taping off the ones that were bad. So you're sort of like, reinforcing the negative at the end of every week, And the questionnaire kind of was exercise the muscle to lean positive.
Could you give me
That's pretty much it.
What were some of the questions? Even just one or two.
It was like, one is describe the best memory that hasn't yet happened to you. So you're basically being asked to, conjure up something aspirational, something you really want, and then talk about it as if it already happened. That's kind of just sort of a play on magic. You just manifest something, envision it, and then it could happen.
Yeah.
You can't get anything that you don't already know you want.
Yeah. But there's something very revealing about that, Like what we were talking about that on Friday. What was the question we were asking in our office on Friday? What would you do if you knew you were never going to fail?
Right.
We were having that conversation in our office the other day, and it got a little deep.
Right. That's sort of the key. That's kind of why I called the record Pleasure. It was a game with myself. I had not been experiencing much of that. At the time, I was going through mostly the sort of like hair dryers of life blowing at me, like a wind tunnel of I was just quite lost at the time when I was writing that record, really confused and disoriented by like life shifting around me. And then I thought, well, why don't I just, instead of dwelling on that, which is, I see the tendency to do that, what if I just call it the opposite? I'll call it pleasure. And maybe I'll manifest some of that.
Maybe what's it called? Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Isn't that the thing? Hold on, this questionnaire you sent out to people though.
So after the journalists, I realized they're in a job that would maybe preclude them from being easygoing about that. But it was because they're the askers, right? And but then we just folded it out into the ether, and it was I think I wrote a letter to people to explaining, hey, if you want to take a minute to answer this, I don't really know what I'm looking for. But if you're interested to just cue your mind this direction, then maybe you can, like, it was for their 5 minutes. It was just for them to have that 5 minutes where they leaned positive. That was the exercise.
What were some responses you got that surprised you?
Well, I think the main thing was there was so many, and also they were all. I saw a through line that everybody is really working hard to deal. Everyone's leaning negative. Everyone's judging themselves. And this was also not culturally about us up over here in our 1%-y North American life. It was all the people from all over the world, and there was a through line of self-doubt and shame, lots of hidden secrets. There was one of the questions is describe a secret that doesn't need to be one anymore. It's sort of like lift the veil off of something that you're keeping a secret.
But Leslie, like, I know that, and I don't want you to talk about this stuff, but like, I know you were going through something really hard when you were making the Pleasure record. I was trying to allude to this a little bit earlier. Was this sort of about getting like an empathy through shared experience? Like you were going through something tough, and I hear that people are going through tough. Maybe my burden isn't as heavy.
I think that's pretty much it. When I was in the thick of it writing, I was looking around for resources, anyone else who had left little crumbs in the forest, some sort of map to get me through. Other people who had been in a similar place. So I was reading a lot. I was listening to Krista Tippett a lot, which is a lot of people talking about their interior lives on her podcast. And I started to see that, wow, when people talk about what's going on, on the flip side, on the inside, unguardedly, then there's a lot of clues. I came up with a word which you'll love, I hope. Accumulation.
Hello. Accumulation?
Yeah, you're accumulating clues. That's what I was.
Oh, that's nice, actually.
It's pretty cute.
Yeah.
Right? I love that stuff.
Yeah.
That's what makes my world go round, actually, is puns like that. But anyway, I was accumulating these clues, and I was doing it through looking for how other people had navigated their way through a difficult time. And then reading these questionnaires, everyone was so generous, mainly because they knew that it would never be exposed to the light of day. This was very private. A lot of people did it anonymously. And I just thought what they did was spend 5 minutes leaning positive. And it's a hard work to lean positive because there's a lot of these details of our subjectivity really becomes this sort of closed climate ecosystem. We're in like a diving bell of our own version of reality. And in there, you can kind of have impunity to justify whatever you're feeling and whatever tendency towards negativity or just feeling overwrought or overrun. And then all of a sudden you see everyone else is going through the same thing.
And I think that's what you hear like when you go through this podcast, because I think you take some of the themes on this survey, you take some of this commonality, you turn them into the podcast. I want to play a little bit of it.
Why work so hard if I couldn't see myself on the podium and someone announcing me as the Olympic champion?
When I was pursuing my dream, I felt exhilarated, excited, and intoxicated.
I felt like the most electric, vibrant, creative version of myself.
You're listening to Q. I'm Tom Power. That's a clip from the first episode of Pleasure Studies, and a new podcast from Feist out today. Can you tell us what did we just hear?
Those are each episode is 3 or 4 people telling their own stories about a particular journey in their lives, a particular era. And this one, and each episode sort of touches on different themes. So this one is about loss and perseverance, how you manage to stand up again. And that's an Olympic hurdler named Perdita Felician, who tripped after she was a world champion, sort of like aiming for the gold, and she tripped at her first hurdle.
Oh my.
So that's sort of, we kind of did the thing where we're like, well, what's an ultimate dream to lose? Robbie Lackritz and I, who's also executive produced with me, we were, like, what's a real loss? We thought, well, an Olympic medalist, like that's about as your whole life has been pointed at one thing.
That's a defined loss as much as you can get,
Yeah. And Dylan Evans is a guy in England who started an intentional community that kind of dissolved around him over many years. And that was, a real utopian ideal that was lost. And then Sarah Brooke Curtis is a woman who lost her child a few days after the child was born. And those are three very singular stories, but somehow when you weave them together, you kind of braid them together. The editing is super intuitive and experimental. It's not like, here's my story beginning, middle, end, and here's the next story beginning, middle, end. They shed light on one another.
I think that's what I was surprised by, because I guess the way I'm used to listening to things was that we would hear the story of the medalist, and then we would hear the story of the parent who lost her child, and then we would hear the story of all in one and one. But there's something about braiding them together, right? There's something about, as you say, braiding them together that gives a real, again, commonality of experience.
Like kind of no matter what the details of what's going on for you, if you're touching on the same bedrock, I mean, that's the thing. I was feeling very tied to and what's the word? Like I was feeling really dedicated to the details of my life. And that's something about that you eventually wear yourself out on. You're like, the details matter much less than the place I'm living the details from.
Well, what do you mean you were kind of burnt out on the details of your life?
Well, I mean, at some point when you've lived long enough.
Hello.
Hello. You start to repeat yourself enough that you're like, oh, I'm back here again. And someone once said to me, you can go around and around in circles. I mean, and I did for many years. Or eventually you can sort of work to make that circle into a spiral. So you're still spinning, but you're at a different altitude every time you come back around.
Yeah.
And you can kind of ascend your way out with these new clues, So that's the getting sick of yourself. Well, then it becomes an extra interesting secondary life you can live where you're wondering how you're conducting yourself in any moment, no matter the details. Like, from where are you acting, And so when you take three stories and you shed light on each other, there's something to be shown that despite the details, there's still like big things, small things, they can all, pull you towards some sort of greater ideal. I don't know. It's a pretty hopeful podcast,
I would say so. Did it work? Did it make you personally feel something different collecting these stories?
Absolutely. It totally did. It was sort of a way to make the questionnaire tangible, because I really wanted to respect people's privacy when they were answering that. I wasn't going to lift those stories out. But there was something where I got this bird's eye view on this tendency towards self-doubt that I thought, why don't we just go around the world and find some people that can illustrate these points. And it's basically just a resource to lean positive or to lean towards hope, because none of these people are in the thick of their stories. They're all on the other side, so they have some information on how you get to the other side.
And again, it worked for you. Like, you felt something different.
I did. And also, I mean, I always joke that writing songs and touring is kind of like a GPS for the soul or something. You're one place and you get to another by writing about it. You make it be past tense. You sing about it as past tense, and then it somehow becomes past tense through the repetition on tour. So I gained distance from my own stuff and perspective, and then this podcast series was a pretty useful tool. It's sort of like being in a subway car when it's just putting thought bubbles out above everyone's heads. You think you're alone on that subway car, but if you were to just sort of get a look at what was going on in everyone's minds, you would have a lot more in common than you think, which I think is a pretty useful thing in this hyper-isolated way we live our lives,
But if I love what you said there, was a songwriting performing is a GPS for the soul. But I feel like your soul is nourished through some of these stories that you're hearing, right? And these commonalities. And I remember in my life moments where I felt so alone and I felt a lot lost. Just again sitting down and having a beer with someone who was going through something that I was going through, or had in the past gone through something I was going through, changed me, right?
Sorry.
Please go ahead. Go on.
Well, I was just going to say, friendship is sort of like you're messed up on Thursday, and your friend really walks you through it and has empathy for you, and then they're really messed up on Saturday, and then there's an equality there. There's it's not a one-way street. We kind of have to understand that we're the trusted one, and therefore we can trust, the other person.
I guess the point where I wanted to make was that if the last record was, and this is me being really reductive, but like if the last record was you were going through something so hard and you kind of imposed pleasure on it, as we talked about, it's sort of a manifestation of feeling good. Given that you're hearing these stories of that will legitimately get you through a hard time, that will legitimately lift your spirit, that will, as you mentioned, legitimately give you hope. I have to ask: is that impacting the music you're making now? These stories?
I'm pretty sure it will. I haven't really begun writing again, but I know that it'll be from a different perspective than I was. I'm a little bit less curious about combing through the same territory of me and my feelings. I'm more curious about our common feelings. Who knows? Maybe I'm going to become a journalist. Just kidding.
You can, man. Anyone can. I play banjo. The barriers are low, Leslie. But I'm glad to hear you. I wanted to ask you if you're making more music because
Yeah, of course, always. It's just I'm curious from a different place. I suppose I've done it a lot now, and I'll be interested to see what I'm interested in enough to write about.
You feeling any more at peace in your day-to-day life?
I am. Thanks for asking. For sure. Yeah, you just get some distance from things, and hopefully when you come out the other end, you're not just sort of stumbling. I came out the other end with, it's that all the cliches are true, that you get forged by the fire. I'm definitely more resourced up to figure out whatever is to come next, undoubtedly will come next.
Any questions for me?
I'm
thinking about your questionnaire for
I
journalists.
know. How do you want people to describe you in 25 years?
Tall. Empathetic. Mm-hmm. Empathetic. If I can get that one. Kind and empathetic. These are the things that I was kind of raised being an importance in my life. And I think as long as those things are there, because as you know, when you get deeper and deeper into this kind of thing where you have microphones in front of you and people are interested in what you have to say, I've seen a lot of people lose that part of themselves. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I will. No. But I hope I don't.
You won't.
You know what I mean?
The joke this morning when I filled it out myself, which was a hilarious exercise with my coffee, I was like, wow, this question about how I want to be described in 25 years, after I'd written the words, I thought, I think this is how someone could describe me now.
What is it?
Oh, it was similar. It was like empathetic, curious, mischievous, I don't know, up for fun, kind of like capable. I was like, well, that's pretty good if I'm already at my 25-year goal.
I'll give you one more. Can I give you the one we did in our office on Friday that's not in your questionnaire?
Yeah, sure.
What would you do if you knew you could never fail?
Oh, man. I'd write a great work of fiction.
I think you can do that anyway.
No, because when you read Heartbreaker by Claudia Day, you get reality check. It's sleight of hand. It looks easy, but it's not.
In 1 year, Leslie Feist will be here for her new mystery novel.
Yeah.
I can't wait. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much. You too.